To our next session, I'm inviting Keiran, Shannon, Pat Bonner and Kevin Kilbane to the stage. And our next session is focused on people in sports as a driver of collaboration. And Keiran is a sports journalist, very famous one now, with the Irish Examiner. And he's going to talk to two reasonably well-known footballers, if I can say. Maybe I'm understating a bit of the word reasonable. And they're going to literally be interviewed by Keiran in relation to how people in sports and their own experience adds up to a driver of collaboration in these islands. Over to you, Keiran.
Peter just introduced myself. I suppose I should introduce myself like a lot of people involved in sport who make a profession in sport. You start off being a supporter, first and foremost, like a lot of you there. And I would have, like a lot of you here, would have been a supporter and being a huge admirer of the two men either side of me. It's a bit of a cliche to say that our guests here don't need any introduction, but I think they absolutely deserve an introduction. We're talking here about, we're talking about one of the main sessions, I suppose, themes that we want out of this session is how sport can enhance communities and bring communities and indeed countries together. And I think it's fair to say that these two men have both facilitated that and embodied it. If there was one sporting moment that brought this country together, I think it would be fair to say it was the 1990 World Cup. And if there was one moment from that World Cup, it was when Packie made the famous save.
Still.
But it takes. But I think it's fair to say, Packie.
I was going to say only one save. That's all I've done ever in my life.
I can testify that as well. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned there about saying about how Packie and you said you watched us grow. And when I was a boy growing up, watching Packie, he was a huge hero of me growing up as well. So it was an honour when I first, came in and around the Irish setup and had Packie as one of my coaches.
Yeah, because I mean, it was even just reading. Kevin's got a new autobiography out, by the way, just to give it a good, decent plug.
Thank you.
And he's genuine. That's not just something he saw when he saw Packie there this morning in the forum. In the first chapter, he talks about how Glasgow Celtic and Packie in particular was a hero of his. But just what Packie alluded to there, as much as that was that great moment, he wasn't a moment. He was a career. You're talking about the fifth most decorated representative player to play for Celtic. You're talking about a man who won, was it 4 leagues with them, Packie?
It's easy.
Yeah. 3 cups. And we're also talking about a man who also went on to give to the game after his own playing career finished, particularly working with the FAI. And we were just talking even there about his work now. He's again involved in the game, again globally, in other communities, be it UEFA, and also still involved hugely in the Irish game. Then Kevin is someone who didn't grow up in Ireland as much as he became Ireland's 3rd most decorated player and played for the country 66 consecutive times, which is an astonishing achievement in itself, in particular when you consider there were 4 different managers over that span, and yet they put down Kevin Kilbane on the left every time. And yet he didn't grow up in Ireland. He grew up in another community. And again, it's very fitting that Kevin is here. And he went on to play for multiple clubs in some of the biggest cities in the UK. And again, his experiences there, I think you'll gain from that experience here as well. And as we know, Kevin now is becoming a very well respected analyst and pundit. And that comes down to a lot of both his insight and his integrity. I was reading again his book recently, in recent days, and Mick McCarthy spoke in the foreword, and he talked about how Kevin, obviously his resilience as a player, but he said he also talked about just how he had an easygoing disposition, but to play for as long as he did, there was a resilience there. But he also talked about how at the end of the day he was just a man of integrity, and that will shine through. And you'll find that, Packie, that goes for you too, of course. And you'll find a lot from their experiences, because they have basically experienced and lived what we're trying to achieve in this session. So Packie, look, I'll start with you, Packie. Look, we're dealing a lot with urban communities and councils here, and you obviously spent a lot of your career in Glasgow, but you grew up far away from it in rural Donegal, and yet that prepared you for your career and life in urban areas. Talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, Donegal. I don't know if we've got anybody from Donegal. Anybody been on holiday in Donegal? Yeah. All right, good, you've been there, so that's fine. Well, I come from right on the northwest tip of it, down in a place called Burtonport. Outside Dunlow. You might remember the Mary from Dunlow festivals. But that's where I come from. And I suppose it was when I think about it now, as I get older, what influence did that have on me as I sort of progressed through my career and became the person I am today? And our house was quite unique in one sense, because the house was built actually for bed and breakfast in the 1950s. It wasn't plush by any means, but it was built. Now, even on the doors, there's still some numbers, number 7 and number 10, and that on the bedrooms and the old doors. And what did that mean? That meant that people came through our house, and as they stopped bed and breakfast, and then when we got a little bit older, my mum and dad started up again. And there was people from all Northern Ireland in particular, and Scotland, that would come and stay in our house. And from all denominations and that, and sort of we kind of grew up in a way that people just was part of our life, and it didn't matter where you came from, and you got to sort of know all of that type of stuff. And you know, when you think back to the names of the people from Northern Ireland, there was Weavers, there was you know, Clarks, there was all these names that you know, some of you will probably recognise in Northern Ireland. And then we had Wilsons and we had Dawsons and all that kind of. So there was a whole integration. My dad was a great storyteller, and they used to gather around and listen to him, and we were in there, and they used to come back and visit the house years and years afterwards. And you know, it definitely had an effect on me. And then when I had to go across to Celtic, I must tell you, when I went on trial to Celtic, I went out to a little place called Roubaix in France. And I was picked in the team. And if I can describe it, the little small stadium, tunnel coming out up in the corner, a bit like Old Trafford, picked in the team, and I was very excited. And when you were playing with Celtic at that time, they did everything right. We had little pennants to give to the opposition players, and I had to give it to the goalkeeper, and I handed over the pennant, and I had a ball under my arm, and I had a little bag with my rosary beads in the bag and so on, and I ran down, I bounced the ball a few times in the middle of the pitch, and I got down the other end and I kicked the ball into the goals, and I had this habit of touching the crossbar, and I turned round and the two teams were still standing at the top of the pitch listening to God Save the Queen, the national anthem. And here's Packie Boner in the middle of the God Save the Queen running down the pitch, you know. And my excuse was that I didn't recognise that particular thing, so apologies to anybody that's your national anthem. But quickly I learned, and you know, moving away, even though I had all this background going on in Donegal when I was young, moving away, I had to learn and adapt. And going from a place like Donegal into a city like Glasgow was quite an incredible experience. And it certainly took me a while to adapt. I was 18 years old. I remember going into my aunt's house and almost crying myself to sleep at night with homesickness. I had a twin brother in Donegal that I had just left. And you go down this road and you say, well, what's in front of it for me? What's there for me? And you have to be able to adapt quickly and get into it. So it was a huge experience.
How did you adapt?
I think I adapted. I was thinking about it also, what type of person are we? Who are we? And I went on a course years afterwards and I went through that whole process of learning about who am I? If we don't know who we are, then it's very difficult to sort of understand other people. And culturally also, culture's a huge thing, especially in football, and Kevin can talk about that in a second. But culture makes us who we are, but can be very limited also if we don't accept other cultures. That's something I had to learn very quickly. I had to adapt to those people rather than thinking about I'm still a Donegal man. And that type of stuff. So what did I do? I listened, I learned.
Listened and learned what?
I think I listened and learned from other people in and around the dressing room and so on. I listened to the managers and all of that type of stuff. When I found out about myself, I'm an introvert. I don't know what you are sitting all out there. You'd be thinking about this now. What am I? Am I an introvert or an extrovert? And my definition of an introvert is that I actually can get up here in front of people and talk. I can play in front of 60,000 people. I can speak to 500 people, but I need to be prepared. But my energy is going down and down and down, and I need to get back to Donegal. I need to get back to the quietness of the beaches in Donegal and walk and build my energy back up. As I get older, I can do it more often, and I can stay longer at it. While the extrovert can go to Donegal and walk the beaches, but he wants to be back in Glasgow, in among where it's all happening. And that's the difference. And I found out that I'm actually an introvert. I also found out that I'm very judgmental of people. I can make up my mind about people very quickly, and that's a fault, because I've learned that lesson many days. Craig Levine, who was the manager of Scotland, for example, I used to hate Craig Levine when I played. He played with Hearts, centre half, and he used to come down into the box, and we'd be almost, he was trying to score a goal, I was trying to save it, and I would be sort of, oh, I don't like this guy, I hated the guy. And I didn't know the guy. But when I went on my first coaching course in Scotland, who was my roommate? Craig Levine. But he was fantastic, and we built up a great relationship. That hasn't developed that relationship because he went off into his own thing, but over that period, it was fantastic, and I got to know the guy. So I think it's listening, not being too judgmental, knowing yourself, and then getting to know other people and other cultures and how to adapt to that. I think those were the big lessons for me initially. Took time.
Kevin, growing up in Lancashire, Preston area,
Yeah.
Who were you?
Yeah, well, I grew up, I would say, an Irishman in England, which is very strange for a lot of people to comprehend with, really. I always felt I was Irish growing up. I always, certainly, you know, I had a very, very strong Catholic beliefs. My family instilled that in me from when I was a young boy. And as I grew up, I was kind of always around Irish people. I always seemed to be around Irish people growing up. And going back to what Packie's saying there about trying to be more open to different cultures and different personalities and what have you, I think probably along those sort of lines, very judgmental of people. Certainly when I was younger and when I got to a certain age, very judgmental of people very, very quickly. And I'm sure probably a lot of you can relate to that as well, where you can be very judgmental very quickly, and you have to try and open. You've got to try and be a different person as you get older. But growing up in Lancashire, for me, I certainly found with my parents, we always looked, if we were ever away together, you'd look for the nearest Irish pub or the nearest Irish whatever it would be, to try and associate. Certainly my mum and dad would always say to me growing up about the times back home when they lived and where they grew up. So that was kind of put onto me, and that was kind of why I always felt I was Irish. Although I was born in England, I had no natural links to Ireland apart from through my family. So I grew up that way. And as I got older and I started to progress, certainly in football, and I started to realise maybe when I got to 15, 16 I could have a career in the game. That was always my big calling for me. I always wanted to play for Ireland. That was a huge thing for me, a huge honour. When I managed to play just once for Ireland was a huge honour for me. But that was the only thing that was in my mind growing up. But when you're in an environment, I grew up, and when I started at Preston, we were a League 2 club as it is now, Division 3 at the time. And we had a few Scots, we had, I think we had one Welsh lad, but predominantly it was a British team. There was no different cultures, there was no different people from different cities around the world or countries around the world. It was a very British-based game, and that was kind of evident throughout English football at that particular time, certainly in Scottish football as well, wasn't it? I think it was very much like that. And I think in the early 90s, when the Premier League was introduced, you started to see different personalities coming in, different cultures, different players coming in. I think the immediate reaction initially when foreign players are coming in, he's lazy, he doesn't do this, he doesn't do that. There wasn't a general acceptance within the game from foreign players, I think, when they first came in. And I think when you start to get to know various people and various cultures, you start to take on board, as Packie was saying before as well, what they can give to you, how you can develop as a person yourself, without losing the morals that's been instilled in you. But you have to generally learn and take on board what other people have given to you along the way.
Just can you imagine going to Glasgow with the name of Packie? Yeah. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
We grew up in Donegal. We didn't. Sorry, I hope there's no people in here with Pakistani origin, but we had no Pakistani origin people in Donegal. I went to Glasgow. I must tell you a story about this. I went over and everybody called me Packie. It's a West of Ireland name. My Christian name is Patrick, and my wife calls me Pat, and so on. But I went in and I got into the team, and I bought my first house, a little semi-detached, and my brother was over, two pals, one from Dublin, one from Donegal, over for the Christmas, New Year. I'm playing football, they're on holiday. So we run out of all the breads and the milks and all that, and I eventually said to Connell, my friend, says, come on, we're going down to the local shop. And the only shop that was opened was the local Pakistani shop on the corner. And I go into the shop, and I'm down the bottom of the shop, and Connell's up the top of the shop, and he's shouting down to me, he says, Packie, what kind of bread do you want here? And the wee guy behind the counter is going, you insult me, you must leave my shop. And we became very good friends afterwards because I had moved into the thing. So I had to change my name to Pat, just to fit into a new culture. Now, of course, I'm delighted as Packie because it's a bit of a brand. People know me who is Packie, you know. So now there's a little cultural thing that we had to change. I shouldn't.
Speaking of culture and integration,
I think growing up in Preston, it was. I don't know if anyone's been to Preston that's in here. Preston's it's a smallish town. It's actually a city now, believe it or not. But I think we did have a bit of a multicultural society in Preston. It wasn't a huge multicultural society, and when I was 20, I moved to West Bromwich Albion. I moved to Birmingham, and Birmingham was totally different, big city, totally different from what I'd been used to growing up. And I was always, growing up, I'd always find solace in my friends, would be very, very close to my friends, who kind of was from the same background as me as well. We were kind of very, very, the same mentioned before about being into it. But when I moved to Birmingham, it was a total culture shock for me, a huge change for me in my way of thinking in my life. And I think that was probably the real test for me and the real change for me in life when I was about 20 and I moved to West Brom. And of course, you know, I went on to different cities and different places around the UK from there, but that was a big change for me, I think.
Yeah, but the other thing I would like to mention, I always found that, you know, when you go through this sort of pathway, let's call it a pathway in sport especially, and you get opportunities, but there's huge challenges there. And you can hide away from the challenges. You can say, well, no, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to, especially when you come from a place like Donegal, there's huge challenges, and you can hide from them. But sometimes you've got to take on that challenge, but it just doesn't happen. You have to work it through in your mind, and get support around you and people around you. But there's also opportunity out of it.
What do you think?
I think just with one thing on that though, I think the biggest thing for, you know, you mentioned about when you dropped in a place, Packie said he went over to Glasgow. The amount of players that I found, certainly at the top end now, they're coming from all around the world now, different cities and different cultures, and they're dropped in a city, and there is more of a support network for them now. I don't know what it was like, certainly for Packie in Glasgow a number of years ago. Lads with such an amount of homesickness, really, you know, players are judged on what they do on the pitch, and it's only a small percentage of life, really. You're playing for 90 minutes on a Saturday when you're visually in front of everyone, everyone's seeing what you're doing, and if you're not playing well, he's poor, bad player, crap player, and people are judging you from that. But a young boy now, you have so much to take into account when you're dropped in a city, and you have to adjust to a new life. You have to adjust to, like you said, Packie said, they're getting a house. You're 16, 17 years old, 18 years old, go and buy a house. I never had a house at 16. I lived with my mum until I was 20. So, you know, you have these different hurdles that's put in front of you as a sportsman, as a player, and you have to adjust. And it's only the very small few that can actually survive in the environment. It's a very small percentage. The rewards are there for when you do well, but you have to adjust off the pitch more so to actually get your rewards on it. That is the massive thing that's come out of the game now, certainly in the last 15, 20 years.
What way, I suppose in this case, the clubs as organisations could have helped integrate them into the community and into where they were?
Yeah, clubs now will have a huge support network, certainly at the top end. Down at the lower end, if there's lads coming in from abroad, there's not really, because the clubs don't have the finances to do it.
We're talking about just adapting to change, and the clubs themselves were adapting because the Premiership went from a case where there was maybe 3 or 4
Packie himself, he's been involved in more the technical side of football himself as well, and he probably recognised that himself, wouldn't you, really?
Yeah, you know, adapting to change. Celtic Football Club, for example, when I went there was 3 people that ran the club. 3 people, a woman and almost Jim Kennedy, who was in charge of all the tickets and that. Now there's about 300-400 people, and the club is massive. When I made my debut for Celtic against Motherwell on St Patrick's Day 1979, 6 months after I went over, by the way, there was, and I tell people this, there was only 16,000 people at the game. And on St Patrick's Day, you would expect it was midweek, only 16,000. Home game against Motherwell. And I played with Bobby Lennox, scored the 2 goals, who was one of the ex-Lisbon Lions. But now, if they drop from 60,000 down to almost 40,000, nightmare. You know, they're now under pressure. The club is massive, and you've got to again fit in and adapt to that whole situation.
Speaking from a personal point of view, your wife and your father-in-law.
Oh yes, of course. That's the other big change. When you go to Glasgow, it's Celtic and Rangers, guys. Let's make no mistake about it. And you're going into a culture there that's quite. And for me, I think that sort of thing, I was never bought into that you're one side or the other, you know. And when I met my wife first, my only wife, by the way, she's still with me 28 years later. I didn't realise it, but her dad was a Rangers season ticket holder, going to support Rangers, and I had just broken into the team. And she tells the story actually, and she had to tell her dad. She was 18 years old, and there was 3 girls in the house, and she had to tell her dad that day that she was going out with a boy. And the first question was, "Here's a boy. Oh, what's his name?" And she called me Pat. Pat, and he was like, "Oh, Pat, you know what's going on here, you know?" And then the next question was, "What does he do?" And the answer was, of course, he was a professional football player, and he was quite happy with this. And then, of course, the third question was, who does he play for? Celtic. Celtic. Oh, you know. So when I went down to pick her up at the house, and I had my first car, by the way, a little Chevette, because I'd broken into the team, and I went down to pick her up, and her mum came to the door, and "How are you doing?" And Anne was upstairs getting ready, and I went into into the living room to meet her father, and he was sitting in the chair with his back to me, with a Rangers scarf around his neck, and the programmes lying all over the floor, you know. So it broke the ice. It was fantastic, you know. It was fantastic. But you know, in them days, he used to go to Ibrox then and watch, sit up in the stand supporting Rangers, but watching me play, and the fans would be giving me plenty of stick as they would do, and him going, "No, he's not a bad goalkeeper." He couldn't admit that I was going out with his daughter, of course, because he would. But that was the culture again that we were breaking into, and it's changed. So I think, probably taking that, all of those things, when I went back into the job here in Ireland as technical director, integration and allowing people to sort of come across different, whatever sport it was, or whatever, one of the big philosophies here in the FAI for us was to allow everybody to play football, no matter where you came from. We have worked with 13 different disabilities, and when you go out and you watch a kid in a wheelchair playing power soccer with a wheelchair adapted with a big ball in front of it, and they're playing 3v3 in a gym, and them living the dream that we lived, to allow those kids, or adults in fact, in their power chair to play football and live their dream of being, that's their World Cup. That was my kind of mission when I came in here as technical, to allow everybody to play football. It wasn't always to become the best player in the world, but it was allowed them to touch into what we, and I think that's a message that we all, I remember also, sorry Kevin for going on, I remember being in Glasgow and having my son Andrew, and I didn't get involved in his career too much when he was a young kid, because I was travelling and we were playing football and that, but I always remember going and then taking him back, and him in the car, sitting, crying in the car because he never got picked that day for the team. He wasn't going to be the best player. He wasn't the best player, definitely, but he wanted to play football, and he was 8 years old. So those things stick in your brain, and when you get the opportunity to lead and be responsible for something, you build those values and those ethics back into the whole thing. And I think it's important, us as leaders or whatever we're doing, that we build on those things, your experiences, but giving everybody the chance, because if you don't get the opportunity, then it's dead.
We'll come back to more of that, Packie, in terms of your role, I suppose, after your playing career finished. Kevin, going back to your experience, and you played with some of the top clubs in the UK and some of the biggest cities, and beyond just being a franchise and your global franchises and the responsibility to getting the next win, and how much of an obligation was there within the clubs to the community? I mean, a club like Sunderland seemed to have that, and as a player, let's say, with a club like Sunderland, how much did you have that responsibility or involve yourself in programs like that?
I think as you get older, you want to take more responsibility. Packie mentioned there about, you know, going to work with special needs kids. My eldest daughter, Elsie, she has Down syndrome. So I've got a close link with the Down Syndrome Association over in England, and over here with Down Syndrome Ireland and the Down Syndrome Centre. And I think that you, as a player, when you're growing up, everything's laid on for you. Everything, you know, you have your kit washed for you. It wasn't so much back in the day at Preston, actually. We used to wash our own kit, clean our own boots. But certainly nowadays, players have everything they need from the age of about 10 or 11. And you kind of become just in that little bubble through your life until until you maybe get a little bit older, you start to realise, you start to take responsibilities. And I think for me, after I had Elsie, I think I was 26 when 27 actually when we had Elsie, and my life suddenly changed all of a sudden when we had Elsie. Everything became different. Everything, you know, you start to recognise your own responsibility and your own role within a club that you kind of took for granted. You're just concentrating on getting yourself ready, like I spoke about before, for that 90 minutes that you are judged on, which there is an element of getting yourself in the right professional manner, eat the right things, drink the right things, and all these sort of things that go with that. But you do neglect the other side of your role and your responsibility within your own community. And I think that clubs, to an extent, don't really touch on that. Really push players. They are doing it now. They're starting to really tap into that, starting to get players to recognise their roles and responsibility. Because at the end of the day, a club's responsibility to a player is to make him aware of his responsibilities, to get himself ready for that 90 minutes on a Saturday. But there's a bigger aspect to a sportsman, or certainly a player in what I'm seeing now. Certainly when I finish now and I look back, there's a responsibility certainly on my behalf now to help other players, whether that would be, you know, I'm just of course working with TV and radio now, but I certainly see it as a long-term goal for me to get involved in different communities. And my role with the Down Syndrome Association over in England is massive and part of my life now, and it's something that I want to try and get involved. I want to try and have as much dialogue as possible with them, so I can aid and assist, not so much even the kids or the young adults that are playing football or tennis or whatever it would be. It's most of the parents as well, educating them on how they can go about things, because there is opportunities within communities to help.
Do you feel as sports people, by the nature of the status they're held in society, can have the fact that you're saying it as Kevin Kilbane, you're not just Elsie's dad, you happen to be...
Well, ultimately I am just Elsie's dad, that's what I am, but
yes.
Of course I have a responsibility that you are recognised and you are seen as this different. You kind of put on a pedestal when... We're all the same at the end of the day. I think we all know you get to a certain age, we are all the same, but you put on a pedestal, and that is where you maybe don't recognise when you are younger that you do have that responsibility. It's not just about playing. You have a way of carrying yourself. You have to carry yourself in a certain way.
It is, you're right, Kevin. And it's amazing, actually. At the end of the day, we are only dad or mum. And I remember, I'll tell you a lovely story about my son Andrew. He was 4 years old and he went to the local primary school, and they always get a celebrity to open the school fete around Christmas time to raise a few bob, and of course I was asked, because Andrew was new to the school. I was asked, but they don't tell the kids until a week before to make it a bit of a surprise. So my wife Anne went down to pick Andrew up from school, and all the kids came running out of the school really excited. Andrew came running down the road, across the lollipop woman, across, Mum, guess who's opening the school fete this year? And Anne says, who's opening the school fete, Andrew? The Celtic goalkeeper, Pat Boner's coming to open the school fete. So Anne had to explain to him that this was silly old dad. And the tears, he started bawling, crying. So there you are, your dad at the end of the day, but we lived through this bubble, as Kevin calls it, is incredible. You know, the other thing, I suppose, talking about responsibility, and we talk about leaders and people that influence you along the way, our life influences, our experiences, but people influence us. You know, and I think back to the time with Jack Charlton, of course, who for me was an inspirational leader, a guy who had so much confidence because he'd won a World Cup and fitted into our culture probably better than maybe even fitting into the English culture, and came over here, but influenced a group of people who lacked a little bit of confidence, but all played with big clubs at that time, Manchester United, Liverpool, Liam Brady with Juventus, we were up at Celtic and so on. But the one thing that he gave me was responsibility. You talked about the word responsibility. I was 26 years old when Jack took over. I was 28 when we made the European Championships, and I always remember going down to Old Trafford to do a training session. It was more about doing free kicks and so on. And eventually, after Jack said a few things, and he said to me, he says, "You're in charge of everything from set pieces defensively." And I was never before that. You were in charge. You must organise it. You must do everything. So I took that on. I was very lucky that I had somebody else that was more experienced with me, and that was Jerry Payton, who's now the goalkeeper coach at Arsenal. He was the backup goalkeeper. We didn't have a goalkeeper coach, remember, in those days. And Jerry, and we sat down and we came up with a sort of a plan and so on. And then the next thing that I did was I shared that plan with two very influential people, was Mick McCarthy and Kevin Bourne, two extremely knowledgeable people, older than me, and then Mick would say, no, I need to take him out there. And we ran that ourselves. But Jack always said, well, if you get it wrong, you're answerable to me. But he gave us the response, and I grew so much within a team context about getting that responsibility at 26, 27 years old. Never happened to me before. Never happened.
Do we do enough of that with kids even at a young age?
I don't think so. And I keep saying it, now you go into a dressing room, and if you know the dressing room scene, it's either done on their iPads, the set pieces are all up on the wall, a player now goes over and checks, where am I standing? Something happens on the pitch, and they say, well, it wasn't my fault because I wasn't told that.
There's certainly a blame culture within the game, as I'm saying. There's certainly a blame culture. It's easy to pass the buck on to someone else. When I first started, and I feel very fortunate, I mentioned before, I started with Preston in League 2, Division 3, and it was your responsibility. It's your responsibility to take responsibility for your own actions on the pitch and off the pitch as well. And there was no one to... If you failed on a pitch on a Saturday and you kept continuing to fail, you'd be out of the game. You'd be out of the game and you were gone.
There was very little proactive interventions.
But there was no room for error as well. There was no room for error really back then. You know, I look at the lads that I came through. There was some talented, much more talented footballers than I was when I was going, even at Preston at that level. But there was maybe only me, or there was two lads actually, another lad below me who went on, had a good career, but there was two out of probably going right through the system, which was probably hundreds of lads that went through Preston at that time. That's only one club. So you're talking that through 92 clubs, two lads or three lads or whatever it be going through every club. And, you know, United's club is highlighted, Man United with the golden age of Neville, Butts, Scholes, all these sort of lads that came through, but that's an exception. Throughout the game, there is, I think it's around about 96% or something like that fallout from the game, which is this incredible fallout from the game, which is, and that's what, again, just what you're saying about the young lads coming over. I told you a story before we came in. We had a big Irish culture at Sunderland, or certainly an Irish element within the youth setup. So we had lads that came over at 15 and 16 and plonked in a city, like I was saying before. There wasn't really a support network for them. So we had this one lad one day. So when you used to come back, there used to be lads, maybe 15 years ago, there'd be a stone or two overweight, or certainly a stone, and you would literally go out and run. First day you'd be doing a 5-mile run, 6-mile run. So this first day we came in, and it was everyone trained together for the first week. So 16 to the pros, everybody went together. So we had this kid at 16 from Dublin. So we went out and did this one run this particular day, and he's done it 2 days on the bounce, and he's thinking, right, I can't be doing this. He's obviously homesick, he's not happy. So we've gone out this one day, we've run. So we set off on this one run around the training ground. As he's come round back towards the change room, he just run off. We never seen him again. He literally run off the training ground. We never seen him again. His career was ended, and that was through lack of support for him, and we'd laugh about it, but there was nothing for him. He just kind of went off, and it's a great story how the fallout from the game and how we can help and
Kevin, by the end of
nurture
your career,
our boys.
You were in a dressing room with different languages being spoken.
Yeah.
I mean, up to what, 10 or 12 nations easily?
Easily, yeah. Easily.
Okay. How did they, because you played on successful teams, and you know the difference between successful teams and unsuccessful teams. It wasn't just talent, it was maybe how that talent integrated, or even as teammates or management helped integrate those players to make them one, to coexist, which I suppose a lot of the people here have to deal with as their jobs. How did you see successful, leaders or...
I think the manager would probably, as I got older, would probably use me or use other pros around my sort of age group when I got older to try and help these young foreign lads that came in. Because I was mentioning before about, you know, you sign from a club pays a fee for you for 1 million, 2 million, whatever it is, but you're going to play for a club, you're in a strange city, and you're being judged on 90 minutes, yet you might be totally unhappy in your life, you're not happy with the culture, you're not happy with the food, the weather, whatever it would be, you're not happy. So it was probably my responsibility as I got older to try and help.
So how did you do that? Would you be talking about
take them out for dinner? Yeah. Take them out for dinner. You know, invite them around your house or whatever it would be.
Give us an example. You don't necessarily have to use names.
Well, we had like Camille Zayeti, who's now playing at Sheffield Wednesday. He came over. You know, he's from African boy. He came over, didn't speak a word of English or very little English. He actually was in Switzerland first, but he came over to us over to Hull, and he was literally. Like, I'm sure he thought himself like a fish out of water. He didn't know where he was. He was in Hull. Where's Hull? I'm sure he didn't know where Hull was. He just probably landed at Manchester Airport, wherever it was, and he gets transferred to Hull. Wouldn't have a clue where the place is. So Yeah, I was in a hotel myself at the time. I was up and down back to Manchester where I lived at the time. So just kind of pick him up. You fancy a bit of dinner tonight? No, not tonight, whatever it is. And pick him up, go out, take him out for dinner, and didn't speak a word of English. Two of us sat opposite each other, just looking in each other's eyes. It was like a romantic dinner, you know. But that's how it was, you know. It was trying to let them just become a little bit happier with the environment that they've gone into. It was my responsibility.
Did you become more multicultural yourself?
Of course.
From having those
Of course. No, just taking on board what the habits, you know, the professionalism, certainly onto the pitch, the professionalism that certain foreign players brought to me, professionalism, how to look after myself, what to eat, what not to eat, what's going to make me better. And I think it makes you a lot more open. I mentioned before, and Packie was saying as well, you're kind of judgmental. I think you're judgmental in the game anyway, because you're worried about somebody coming in to take your position or to oust you from the club or whatever it would be. And I think you kind of have to have that acceptance now, because it's a squad.
What players from or what cultures helped open your eyes that actually helped you?
It'd be various ones. One lad, you may not know the name, he's called Eric Roy. He was at Sunderland with me. Great guy, French lad he was. And Antoine Sibierski, another French lad. Two really good pros, great lads and great characters and personalities as well. And I think probably when you're younger, you have an impression of, say, a Frenchman, you know, arrogant French or whatever it would be, because you have these misconceptions of people. And I mentioned before about Elsie's probably helped me to open my eyes to a lot more different things, not just looking at, you know, disabilities or whatever it be, cultures, different cultures. Eric and Antoine, two good friends. I mean, certainly Antoine's a very good friend of mine. I'll speak to him regular, and he's just, you know, the little things on diet, nutrition, but it's when you get to speak to them, as I mentioned before, we're just dads. We're regardless of where we're from or what we do in the world, we're dads, we're sons, we're daughters, whatever we are.
You had that commonality.
That was it. And you talk about your kids, you talk about your upbringing, and that's what it's all about.
Because you have that in common.
Yeah.
Packie, you became FAI technical director at a time when Ireland became more a multicultural, and it is a global game. That's one thing football has. Tell us about what you saw and programs you helped put in place, and the various partnerships that would have been involved in putting those programs in place.
Well, I suppose that we had our technical development plan. I was very lucky actually when I came into the job as technical director. We had begun the process. Brian Kerr was a technical director, but I was national and international goalkeeper coach, but I was set up the goalkeeping program, so I was part of the process. But we had the plan almost finished. We had to do some more work on it. But when we started talking about the plan, Brian's big thing was, of course, as the head of the youth international teams, he wanted better players, because he's seen the different, I suppose, the issues regarding Irish players compared to the foreign players. But when he started off the process, better players. But how do you get better players? You need better competitions. You need better coaches. Then we started talking about the bigger picture. And the bigger picture then became almost like, well, what else is going on here in Ireland? Here's the professional game. We have a gap at the bottom of the professional game in Ireland that we don't have in England and Scotland. There's no youth structure. We have our grassroots football. We have loads and loads of massive amount of schoolboy football, junior football, and so on. But then we've got this whole recreational thing that's going on. Is it the responsibility of the association to deal with this? How do we make it better? How do we use football as almost, somebody mentioned a tool, maybe, you know, maybe it's not the right word because you have to put a lot more round about that tool, but how do we use it to engage with these people? Ireland obviously changed. There was 200 different languages spoken in Ireland during, I don't know what it's like now, but it's certainly during that period. All these people were coming from an international background that soccer probably and football was the sport that they enjoyed. How can we use that to integrate these people in?
So where did you see that happen?
Well, we set up about 20 different programs, probably maybe too many programs at times. We you know, if we talk about the one, you know, our late night leagues, for example, and I know Carl Mitchell is down there, and the Dublin City Council here have supported us really well in this basis. But by setting that up alone, people from those cultures could come in and play. Our blitzes are just a normal open day where anybody can come and play. Our development officers turn up with a bag of, and they set it up, and people from all these different, and they could come actually in.
What was the benefit of that, did you see?
Integration. People getting to know each other. We talked about people coming into a professional club, but coming into this city, using football as a vehicle to allow them to play. Of course, there was a lot more around that. We did a lot of educational stuff around it and so on. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, things, let them know what the Irish culture that they were coming into, and us learning from their cultures, and setting up little working groups to sit and talk about it, and bringing in some guests and speaking. So it wasn't just football, but it was a whole thing happening around that. You know, dealing with kids who are on the verge of not playing football, but on the streets at night time. The late night leagues, for example, reduce crime in the city. Reduce crime, and the evidence is there for it. If you now, we didn't know how it was going to work at the very start, but let's get up and running it. And the three things that we said was that we needed people. We went into partnership, which was another huge thing within our plan. How are we going to fund this? We had our strategic plan. We talked about it. We made it a big global plan. It wasn't just about getting better players. So we did a lot of thinking. We had to bring people with us, which was absolutely crucial. We went round the country when we were developing it. We had 14 different meetings. I always remember it, and us going up and presenting. We set it out into workshops. What are you going to do? What do you want us to do for you within your own environment? And there was plenty of people from different cultures sitting at those tables also. 14 different, 200 people coming to the meetings. And from all of that information, then we adapted the plan and changed it and made it, give them ownership of it, which was absolutely crucial. We told them that we were going to go back and present it back to them when we were finished also. But with a strategic plan, and you know, when we talk about it, and I'm sure you've got loads of strategic plans, you've gone through a process, I always felt that we needed an implementation plan around it. It wasn't going to sit on the shelf. How are we that was the what, but how are we actually going to make this happen? So we came up with a plan, and then of course we had to go into partnership with different local authorities, government agencies, clubs on the ground, and all of that to make this work. And it wasn't my plan as technical director, it was the people's plan. And with that implementation plan, yes, we were looking into the future, how we were going to do it. 80% of it, when we went back and measured it. And what it did for us, it gave us absolutely focus for what we had to achieve over the next 4 or 5 years. And the great news is that there's a lot of it still going on, even though times have got tough and funding has been drawn back, and Carl will talk about development. All the development officers are still in place, and we're into partnership with the local councils right around Ireland. I remember the momentum started. We started off in Dublin City, and we got, I think it was about 8 development officers at the start, and that grew, and then we went around the other, and everybody could see that football was a mechanism to engage with a community and get the people that was sort of causing maybe issues for the local authorities. And the objectives were exactly the same. But we could use this great, fantastic tool that we had to engage with communities and people. And you know, for me, it was absolutely crucial. And the partnerships then grew because, you know, we could put partners together along with ourselves. And by working it and using some of the money that we had, seed money, I remember the model, it was almost a three-way split. The FAI would give us money, we had to produce money ourselves, and then we got money from the Sports Council and from the local authorities and so on. And we grew it from 25
from existing
people.
Partnerships.
From 25 people up to almost 100 people within the technical department when we finished. And we still took care of our player development, our coach education and so on. But now we were looking at the framework within Ireland. We weren't just concentrating on our international games, our football, which was the traditional way we did it. We weren't just looking at grassroots football. We were looking at the whole picture. And now the good news is that some of the grassroots clubs have now put themselves out almost as football for all clubs themselves. We've got 27 countries who've got all the disability groups are engaged with them, the intercultural people. And I know things have changed a little bit. So it's been a good news story. Things have got tough, we know, financially. And the other thing that I think the message that I would like to say to you is that when you go in and you look, we benchmark. We were lucky in soccer that we have a whole international network to look at. We look to Spain and we look to Germany, we look to all these other countries. What are they doing well that we can learn from? But we need our own identity. We can't take a Dutch culture and stick it in here and we'll just do the Dutch way. It's an Irish way, but we learn from others. And then the final thing in it is we need to adapt very quickly and we need to be very flexible because football is changing so quickly. In the last 20 years, it changed, and we've talked about it earlier in football, but it's changing so quickly. When I travel around Europe now for UEFA and FIFA and travel the world, I can see those changes. And almost within 2 or 3 years now, IT is a perfect example. You know, we don't do Twitter. I don't do Twitter, but Twitter's in the dressing room now. Talk to Alec Ferguson about it. If he says something, talk to Roy Hodgson. When he says something in the dressing room, it's all over the world within 2 minutes. So we have to be flexible, we have to adapt quickly, we have to have our own identity, but we need a strategy, we need to know where we're going, but we need to have our implementation and everybody working in partnership. They're the messages.